All right. Praise the Lord and good evening, everyone. Let's take a few minutes to greet each other. Let everyone know you're here in the chat box, and we're going to get right into our study this evening. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully, you had a great Sunday service, and hope you're getting ready for a blessed and successful week. The summer is here, and it's passing by pretty fast, so I hope you are making the best of it. And just hope you're enjoying your time and enjoying your family. All right. So it's just good to see everybody. Glad we have another opportunity to study and dig into God's word. We're going to get right into our recap today. Praise the Lord, Sister Neely. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Hope you're doing well and hope you got a little bit of rest after service this morning. Really good time. Just thankful for services this morning. We had a really good worship service and I just had a great productive time of fellowship and just engaging and learning more about God's will and what he's going to do through us. So hope you went to church somewhere. If you didn't, you can always visit us at 1215 Calhoun Street. We'd love to have you. All right. So let's get into our recap today. We are looking at, let's see here, a book of Proverbs, and we're looking at some of the readings from 2nd Chronicles, and also we're looking at First Kings. I was trying to see what day we're on. We're obviously well over half of the year. But yeah, we're on. Yeah, well, just barely. We read 157 through 164 this week, and so we're halfway through. I think that deserves an applause. I hope that's the applause button. And so that just shows us how quickly we can move through this reading. And it also shows us how much of the Bible is actually dedicated to the Old Testament. We're not even remotely close to being finished with the Old Testament. And we have all the major prophets to go through, and we got the minor prophets. And so really, if this Bible study teaches us anything, it is the importance of the Old Testament to our understanding of the New Testament. And one of the things I love doing is imagining how the writers of the New Testament may have been reading or thinking through some Old Testament passage as they brought all of this to light in Jesus Christ, right? And that is the beauty of reading the chronological reading plan. I often tell individuals who read this plan that you are equipping yourself to be able to share the Bible in ways that takes individuals years to do it. Years of study, years of professional research. This plan is the way to read the Bible if you want to understand the narrative and what it has to do with the coming of Jesus Christ. Okay? So we're going to pick up where we left off last week, and that was with reading in the Proverbs of Solomon. Solomon is not the only writer, but he is perhaps the biggest contributor to this book. And he is doing it because he wants to leave behind some sort of instruction and insight for his son first and those who will come after him. And so when we look at the Proverbs, I just recently did a study on this. It has such incredible insight in comparison to what you might find in other ancient literature or even in modern literature, right? So I would challenge you, if you will, to go to Books A Million or Barnes & Noble or just surf on the internet and try to discover the sort of wisdom that is prescribed by gurus and individuals who may not even have the same perspective of faith that we have as Christians. And what you'll see is that what most people call wisdom is simply expressions of narcissism and self-indulgence. It's rooted in ancient philosophy, which teaches us that our happiness and our pleasure is the ultimate goal and aim for life. And it frames pleasure around the absence of God, right? Whereas Proverbs frames success and pleasure, if there is any to be found, around the existence of God and the obedience to God, right? So it's interesting. The wisdom literature that we're reading in Proverbs is so interesting in comparison to all the other supposed wisdom writings, both ancient and modern, because at the center of it is God, man. At the center of it is the fact that we were created by a creator who is very much involved in this world and in our lives, and he has expectations for us. And our fulfillment of those expectations is essentially the way in which we find the joy, the happiness, the peace, the success that we're all searching for. So it was really interesting to read it against the backdrop of some of the other ancient writings, both ancient and modern. But we'll keep reading into it and see what we can find. Good evening, Elder Williams. Thanks so much for joining us. It's good to see you this evening. Thank you for being here. All right, so let's look at what we picked up. Chapter 13 is where we started, and we ran through the rest of the book, ending in chapter 24. And if you were here with me, you could look at my Bible, and I have marked and remarked some of these things because they're just, Proverbs are meant to be witty, easy to remember sentences that carry profound truth and deep reflection. So there is no categorization, there is no flow. It's just a collection of writings that are proverbs that try to get us to think about things. And what I'm seeing as I read through it is a variety of sayings that pertain to all sorts of, or all parts of our life. There are a number of things that he says over and over again, but one of the things that I find very interesting is the way in which he seeks to protect an individual from greed and a desire for material wealth, without the ethic of working hard and practicing business in an ethical way, right? Or in maybe should I say practicing business or operating business in a way that is reflective of the righteousness of God. That seems to be a running theme. And so when we read through this, for instance, in chapter 13, he talks about some who are poor pretend to be rich, others who are rich pretend to be poor. Wealth from get-rich schemes quickly disappear. And that's something to think about. You know, we all have an opportunity to get something that we want quickly, but it's hardly ever sustainable, right? And if it is worth getting, most times it takes a lot of work. And I think about that a lot. You know, he talks about, you know, the lazy person, the person who wants a lot, but are not willing to work for it, right? There's these things that just go on and on about this kind of person. And then on the other side, there's this talking about a person who wants a lot, but gets it through injustice or unjust ways. So essentially, there's obviously a pattern of working hard, enjoying the fruit of your labors, and just honoring God in the thing that you do to enjoy yourself on this earth. I think one of the things, and I said, I don't know if I said this earlier, but I think it's worth saying again now. Everything we're reading through Proverbs has a big overarching question that we must answer. There's a big question that the Proverbs teaches us to answer in everything we do, whether it's business, health, relationships, or just existing in a broader society. And the question that it forces us to answer is, will this, whatever it is that we are participating in, honor God? Will this honor God? If the question, will this honor God, is no, then what he is demonstrating is that it's something that we should not be participating in, right? The question is not, will this make me richer? The question is, will not this give me what I always wanted? The question is not whether this is good for me. That's not the question. The big question that the text seems to be asking us through each one of these proverbs is, will whatever it is you're doing honor God? And if the answer is no, then therefore the conclusion that one is to reach is that they should not be involved in. Why is this the case? Because the premise of these proverbs is that the fear of God, the fear of the Lord, is is the beginning of knowledge. So true wise living, a wisdom living person will consult their reverence for God in everything they do. And so we see these things not just being a ritual performance, but it is a practical way of living. Now, I am one that strives to master this. I'm striving to master this. It's easier said than done, but when you read through the Proverbs, the goal is obviously to master this kind of living as a general principle for life. Now, what that means is not that every time you do one of these things that you read, then this is what's going to happen. What the Proverbs is giving us is what kind of person should we strive to be in general. And essentially what we get from that is that we should be a person that fears God, reverences God, a person that lives by their values, a person that lives by a conviction of God's existence, a person that is honest, is full of character. Like in general, if you're that kind of person, then according to the Proverbs, you will find success. Or maybe should I say success will find you. All right. So what does this look like in everyday life? Well, it's chapter 16, verse 3, one of my favorite verses. Commit your actions to the Lord and your plans will succeed. It means to, as one would do in the temple, it means to roll over your work, roll over your duties, your activity to the Lord, what you do. And what it says or promises is that our plans will stand upright. It is to say it will be firmly established. It is an interesting word in Hebrew, but what it means is that when our activity is surrendered to God, then God will allow our activity to stand up and produce something that is firm and deeply rooted, something that can't be easily pushed over, right? I think almost like a stake of a mailbox, right? When you put a mailbox stake or the pole in the ground, you want to firmly place it there so that as time goes on, the travel of the mail truck or whatever it may be standing there to uproot the pole cannot easily be uprooted, right? And that's how our actions are supposed to be. It's supposed to be firmly rooted by us rolling those things over to the Lord, meaning committing it to Him and His purpose and His will. All right. Praise the Lord, Jeremiah. Good to see you this evening. Good to see you. Thank you for being here tonight. All right. So that's one of my favorite passages. As I mentioned before, I read Proverbs 16 and 3 in conjunction with Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, because it reminds me that anything I do with God's will in mind, when I commit it to Him, when I give it to Him, then He will allow it to succeed. That's a principle of my life, right? And so that's how we are to filter through the decisions that we have to make. I would love to hear some of you all's favorite Proverbs from this week as well. There was one in chapter 16, verse 9 and verse 33, which talks about God's ultimate control over the way in which our life is experienced. Verse 9, it says, we can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. That's interesting. I thought that was just real. You see what the point is? The point is that you just got to have a certain frame of life, a view of life. All right. Another was, we may throw the dice, but the Lord determines how they fall. That's in verse 33 of chapter 16. So you just see that there is a understanding of God's sovereignty, His complete control over things, and though we may do all these things, ultimately it's God who has the final answer. Sister Neely says there is a lot of talk about just scales. Absolutely. There was a lot of talk about that. And it had to do with this concept that the Proverbs kind of leans on quite a bit of being just a just person. I talked about that in various ways, whether that is how you handle your employees as our servants, but there's this idea, catch this is very good, that a good king, as Solomon or the Proverbs is concerned, will do the right thing by the people, even though they have the ability and the opportunity to do opposite. So there's this idea constantly that a good king will lead to a great nation, right? Because he's doing the honest thing. And to be honest with you, that is rooted in not just ancient wisdom, but it's really rooted in Deuteronomy chapter 17, where God gives the guidelines for what a king should be like. In verse 14 down to verse 20, that a king is supposed to operate a certain way, supposed to think a certain way, do certain things in order to make sure the kingdom is thriving as it is supposed to, right? And so, as I'd always like to quote, John Maxwell has this quote. He says, "Everything rises and falls on leadership." If you think about the perspective from which this book is written, it is written to a person who will someday be king. And it seems as though he wants to remind the reader that you cannot have success being an unfair and unjust person. That's something to think about. I have so many books in my office that tries to convince us in a very roundabout way that being a dishonest person will ultimately lead you to the success that you're looking for. And there are no, there are essentially no, there's no shame about that. Like, essentially what it is we want can be found in dishonest practices. And as much as our world seems to thrive off of maliciousness and victimization and injustice, I just firmly believe, and this almost painful sometimes, but I just firmly believe that doing the right thing ultimately pays off. And here's why I believe that. Because I am convinced that there is a third person in the conversation. That whatever I do is never between me and somebody else, but it's between me, somebody else, and God, right? That he stands in the middle of this, and he sees and he watches, and he acts in accordance to what our behavior is. Some things just scare me, y'all. Like, there's certain things I can't do because I'm afraid of what might come from it, knowing that God sees it, So I just don't. This justice thing is the philosophy yields to the idea that God actually is involved and he sees all this and he's going to do something about it, or he may put you in a slippery slope, as Psalm 37 says, to make you fall upon that which you have done in dishonesty. So he makes a lot of statements about the fool, but it's not to help the foolish person, but to identify the fool and how to deal with that person. That's right. That's good. That's a very good one. He does make a lot of references to the fool. For instance, in chapter 19, verse 1, better to be poor and honest than to be dishonest and a fool. So he's writing this to, well, of course, maybe in some instances, one person of being a fool, but really he's saying, stay away from that person. Like, here's what a fool looks like, and you should recognize it a mile away, and you should stay away from it. So very good, very good. I found chapter 22, verse 4 to be really good. True humility and fear of the Lord leads to riches, honor, and long life. And that doesn't mean that every person that is humble and every person that fears the Lord is rich, obviously. But what he's saying is that this is the pathway, right? True humility and fear of the Lord leads to riches, honor, and long life. I love what he says in verse 1 about a good reputation. Choose a good reputation over great riches. Being held in high esteem is better than silver and gold. And so these are things that are forming the mindset of a young person who might one day carry a tremendous amount of responsibility. Having this information at their disposal is going to be critically important. Now, one of the things I really often try to share with people to do, I encourage young people to read the Proverbs a lot. The way to avoid some of the mistakes and some of the misfortune that one can experience in life is by committing to this sort of lifestyle early, right? Saying that we are going to be a Proverbs kind of person, living by godly wisdom rather than living by whatever thing that I might find to be helpful to me getting where I need to be. In other words, I would like to encourage young people to read the book of Proverbs as much and with the sort of intensity that you would read your most influential self-help literature. Like, read the Proverbs, right? Begin early saying that this is the kind of person I'm going to be, and I'm going to commit to this kind of lifestyle. Okay. So that is what I find helpful. This is what I think is most beneficial to a young person. The earlier you can grab this, the better off you'll be, right? All right, so let's go a little further. Let's look at some of the other proverbs. What are some other proverbs that we had? Let's see here. There are a number of things. Oh, back to Sister Neely's point, chapter 22. Don't rob the poor just because you can, or exploit the needy in court, for the Lord is their defender. He will ruin anyone who ruins them. You know, so you see verse 22, 23. We have a lot of things going on in our court system. We have a lot of things going on everywhere where people do the wrong thing just because they can, not because they necessarily need to or have to. They just do it because they can. And according to this passage, the Lord will defend those who are the victims of such behavior. Typically, you're going to see that God is going to intervene in some way, you know? And so, again, these proverbs are meant to be wisdom sayings that will help people understand how the world works because God is in control of it. All right, let's go a little further. Let's do a few more proverbs, and then we'll jump into our narrative here. Okay. I love 27 verse 20, chapter 27 verse 17. This is a good one. We've heard it before. Iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. So it's just good to see this principle that all people should be around people, other individuals who can make them better. That's the idea. All right. So that's why I always encourage people to have mentors. I encourage people to be in a good community, where you go to church, who your friends are. All of that is important. Okay. So let's see what Sister Neela had here. Proverbs 27:26. Your sheep will provide wool for clothing, and your goats will provide the price of a field. Yep. Let's see here. Okay. Yeah, good. Know the state of your flocks and your heart into caring for the herds. For riches don't last forever, and the crown might not be pleased to pass to the next generation. After the hay is harvested and a new crop appears and the mountain grasses are gathered in, your sheep will provide wool for clothing, and that's good. You know, that proverb, chapter 27, verse 23 through verse 27, reminds me of a philosophy my dad lived by. That was to work hard and take care of your own self. Don't lean on too many other people or anybody else to do that. Like, especially when you talk about ministry. And that's one of the reasons why I operate the way I operate now. But verse 16, stopping her complaints is like trying to stop the wind or I don't know if you meant verse 16 of chapter 27, Sister Neely. Okay, so 24:16. There we go. All right, there we go. All right, let's see what that one says. Yeah, okay. So the godly may trip 7 times, but they will get up again. But one disaster is enough to overthrow the wicked. That's good. That's good. I actually circled that one because for some reason I misunderstood that verse, perhaps previous times. What it speaks to, as I understand it, is the fact that godly people have mercy, the mercy of God, on their side in ways the wicked people don't. That a godly person can endure several stumbles, trips, and God will raise them back up. But a wicked person only takes one disaster and then everything falls apart. And I think that speaks to this idea that whenever we talk about being God's people, what we essentially have is the mercy of God on our side. This is why the prophet said in the Old Testament, I think it was Haggai, maybe it was Hosea, but one of them stated that every day we're presented with brand new mercy. And I kept asking myself, why would a believer need mercy every day? And it's because we ourselves are subject to falling, and it is the beautiful act of God that is working on our behalf to give us what we need to withstand those stumbles and bring us back where we need to be. And so same concept here. The godly may trip 7 times, not the sinner, but the godly may trip 7 times, and the Lord gets them back up. Okay. All right. So that's beautiful. Very good. Very good. I said Hosea. It's not Hosea or Haggai. It is Lamentations. It is Jeremiah. All right. So good to have that clarification. Brand new mercies every day. Lamentations 3:22. All right. Very good. So good stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. So let's keep on going. Let's move through it. So now we are facing our narrative again. 1 Kings 5-8, 2 Chronicles chapter 2 through chapter 5. And in these passages are the finishing details, the details of the temple being completed. 1 Kings chapter 5 through chapter 8. And it's a beautiful account. Gosh, it's such a beautiful account of how the people of God were able to come together and build this glorious temple for God that would represent their devotion to him. I thought it was pretty interesting this week as I was reading that God kept telling them, I don't need your temple. I don't need your temple. I don't need your temple. That's right, Jeremiah. God's grace is sufficient. That's right. That's what Paul teaches us, and that principle is all throughout Scripture. But it talked about how much God kept telling them he doesn't need or want or request their temple, but he gives them permission to build it anyway. And they build the most elaborate thing that they could build to honor God. At least that's the point. That's the way it started off. And I always share, I like to share and remind folks that bad things always start good. Bad things always start with good intentions. The struggle is not with the intention of what has been started. The struggle is with maintaining that as time goes on. You see that their intention was very simple: to build a temple that honored God and reflected his holiness and his presence in the nation. This intention, however, got overridden by their own personal, that's such a dangerous thing that scares the life out of me. It became overruled by their personal ambition, their selfish ambition. And all of us are capable of doing that. All of us have the capability of doing a thing with a noble purpose at first, until that thing continues to grow and become something more than what we thought it could be. And then it seems as though our intentions get lost somehow or another. And that's what essentially is going to happen with this temple. Very noble intentions, but those intentions get lost and it becomes a vessel and a article of idolatry is what happens. But I want us to see just how amazing this building was. I can't help but to acknowledge and really appreciate the participation of the people who came together. The text says that Solomon received this wisdom from the Lord in verse 12, and he was able to orchestrate this workforce that is incredible. Now, I want you to look at chapter 5, 1 Kings chapter 5, verse 13. And I want you to look at the labor force that Solomon was able to put together in this project. We talked about, I remember seeing the comments that we were talking about, well, how could Solomon build something as amazing as this? Well, look at his workforce. Text says he had 30,000 men from all Israel. He sent them so that each man would have these different shifts, 10,000 for every month. He also had 70,000 common laborers, 80,000 quarry workers in the hill country, and 3,600 foremen to supervise the work. 3,600 supervisors, some teams are not as big as that. This man. So what I want you to see is look at his ability to organize a nation. I don't know. I would assume. Let's see. I'm just trying to look up how big is the federal government. Here in America, we have about 2.6 to 2.9 million direct employees. That's what estimates show. And that would include, let's see here. That's actually probably aside from the military personnel. So, living in modern time, just put that in perspective. This little nation had hundreds of thousands of employees working on one project. Okay, to the point where he has 3,600 supervisors to manage the workforce for this one project. So what I want you to see is that this temple was no small feat. It was an incredible, ambitious project that Solomon had the ability to orchestrate and fund through the wisdom that God gave him. And this is where I pray, as I pray hard for this, because we have heard people allude to the idea that to do things for God means to do it spontaneously without a strategy. You just kind of get it. You just kind of wing it, right? I don't think that's the way God wants his people to be. In fact, I'm convinced of it, that God wants to, by his spirit and by the wisdom that he gives us the strategies, the processes, the techniques, the systems, the structure that we need to do the things that he called us to do. And so what we're reading, did not happen by accident. It didn't happen by a whim. It was just simply God's wisdom guiding Solomon to do amazing work. He gave him the wisdom to build, to grow, and to implement. And that's what he asked for. And he got it. And he did it better than anybody in Israel's history. So that's admirable. What's even more admirable is the cooperation of the people to actually get it done. It says in chapter 6, verse 11, the Lord gave this message to Solomon concerning this temple you are building. If you keep all the decrees, this is the big if, this is the big stipulation. If you keep all my decrees and regulations and obey all my commands, I will fulfill through you the promise I made to your father David. I will live among the Israelites and will never abandon my people. So that's the big if. You want to mark that in your Bibles, because that's the contingency that God gives Solomon at the building of this temple. Okay. Now we'll get into this a little more and we'll see how that turns out. But that is the if. That's the big if statement. All right. Now, what we saw is that Solomon took 7 years to build the temple, but Solomon took 13 years to build his palace. So you can see just how big it must have been. It must have been a massive project if we can compare it by duration of building time. But the point is to show that Israel has found a sort of success that it has never had before. And they are doing very well during the reign of Solomon. They are living in a sort of success that has been unprecedented for them, and things are going well. So whenever people begin to refer to the good old days, yes, they have David in mind, but at the back of that, they have David in mind because it led them to the times of Solomon. The infrastructure of David led to the building ability of Solomon. And so Israel will have that as a point of reference for years to come as various kings come along and they are not able to somehow acquire the sort of success that they've had during this time. This is as good as it gets. I mean, they are rolling in all kinds of success, and it is sometimes is the reason we'll see for their downfall. But the thing that's good is the prayer of dedication that Solomon read around this temple. And it is mirrored in 2 Chronicles as well. But what we discovered in the prayer of dedication in 1 Kings is that this building was supposed to be more than just a place where they gathered. It was supposed to be a place where the glory and the reputation of God would be proclaimed. In chapter 8, verse 41, Israel seems to lose sight eventually of what the intention of this uh, this temple was. The temple was supposed to be the thing that drew people from their pagan worship to worship of God. And let me just share with you why we know this. This is in verse 41 of chapter 8. In the future, foreigners who do not belong to your people Israel will hear of you, and they will come from distant lands because of your name, for they will hear of your great name and your strong hand and your powerful arm. And when they pray toward this temple, then hear from heaven where you live and grant what they ask of you. In this way, all the people of the earth will come to know and fear you, just as your own people Israel do. They too will know that this temple I have built honors your name. Here's what he's saying. This temple is actually supposed to serve as what we might refer to as an evangelistic tool. This is not just for our own personal enjoyment. This is supposed to be a means by which we communicate to the world the glory of the name of Yahweh, the honor of Yahweh. That when people see the temple, they're supposed to say, how great is Yahweh? So never was it something that they did to simply communicate their fame and their wealth and their riches. It wasn't supposed to be about all of that. It was supposed to be about one simple thing. If God did all of this for Israel, then he must be a great God. And he is worth following and serving beyond any other God that we might find in our own land or in our own tradition, right? It was supposed to be the thing, one of the things at least, that drew people to Jerusalem, drew people to God to worship him as Israel was doing. What's going to happen is that they're going to begin worshiping the temple to the point where people can't see God any longer, and it's going to jeopardize its longevity in that land. It's going to jeopardize the ability for the temple to remain as such because they will exploit it and misuse it. Okay. So one of the things that's beautiful about chapter 8 is whenever these prayers were offered, it says the Lord appeared before Israel. And it says in verse 58 of that same chapter, may he give us the desire to do this, his will in everything, and obey all the commandment, decrees, and regulations. And may these words that I've prayed in the presence of the Lord be before him constantly, day and night, so that the Lord our God may give justice to me and to his people Israel. The people of all the earth will know that the Lord alone, that Yahweh alone is God, and there is no other. And so we see, we'll see in chapter 9 the response that the Lord gives to this. But this is the prayer. This is what the intention was. And so you see, it starts off great, but we're going to read how somehow or another they become sidetracked. Okay. Now, if we read in 2 Chronicles chapter 1, we see the same history, but the point is a bit different. So many people say, well, what's the difference between Chronicles and Kings? Well, there's really one big difference. The first is written with two different motives in mind. The Chronicles is written to encourage those exiles who are returning back to Jerusalem, to rebuild after being exiled in the Babylonian captivity. The Kings is written to give an overall history of what happened between both Israel and Judah as they were split or exiled by the Syrians and then later Judah by the Babylonians. It gives us a collective and overall historical perspective. Judah is in exile, and many people believe Ezra wrote 1st and 2nd Chronicles to encourage them to have a sort of get up and go attitude. Guys, we've fallen before. Our history records it, but God has given us another chance, so we got to take it by the horns and go for it. That's the perspective that the Chronicles gives us. And for that reason, you'll see that a lot of the negative details are missing from Chronicles in comparison to 1 Kings. You'll also see that David and his family are presented in a light that is, for the most part, positive, while the Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, seems to portray everything, rather good or bad, because the motive is not to show anything in respect to David's family or his kingdom. It is simply to tell what happened and how Israel's history had landed them into exile by both, again, the Assyrians and then later the Babylonians. So you'll see that the attention is, for the most part, on David, his family, his king, his line, his lineage. Whereas in Kings, you get this kind of back and forth. One moment we're talking about the king of Israel, the next moment we're talking about the king of Judah, until finally the king of Israel is basically overthrown. Israel is scattered, and we just have Judah left. I would love to share with you. I can't do it now, but I'll share it at some other point. But what you want to do is get you a good timeline that shows how the prophets and how the kings in this story align with one another. That as we're going down the line, especially when you read Kings, you'll see that the kings of Israel are next to the kings of Judah. And then on the side there, you'll have prophets who are speaking to them as their reigns are being fulfilled. Their time of leading is being fulfilled. And what you'll discover is that there are some kings in Judah who overlap with other kings in Israel. And then you have prophets that are speaking to either Israel or Judah, or at sometimes to both of them, based on what's going on in the history. It is hard to catch it as you're reading through the Kings, because you're like back and forth. But a timeline will help us. And I'm going to try to just put that in the comment section at some point so that you can have it and you can see it, because it is very helpful to understand that there are really two stories being told at the same time, one concerned with Israel, one concerned with Judah, and then there's the message of the prophets to both as we read the story of the two, all right? And to be honest, they won't be together in this way very long. And there will be a moment as soon as Solomon's lifetime is over where the divide will ultimately fracture this nation in a way that's irreparable until the coming of Jesus Christ. And we'll see the prophetic messages that speak to his unification of the nation. Okay? So this is the part that gets us our scholarship, our understanding, our expertise of the narrative. Knowing this storyline is what's going to help us. Okay, so we read a good bit this week. We are still in the lifetime of Solomon, and we have a good bit to go. But just rest assured, once Solomon's time is over, it's going to begin to roll fast. So let's take it all in. Let's understand the beauty of Solomon's temple. Next week we'll go over a view of that, and then we'll begin to see what the successors do to this grand temple that has been built, and it won't be good. So we'll see what happens from there. But listen, it's been a good time recapping. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've been blessed by the reading this week. I hope you will continue to read. Let's continue to be encouraged. Let's continue to strengthen ourselves by what we read. And I know that God will bless us as we commit to his word, not just reading it, but being transformed by it. I believe that. So let's continue to read, stay encouraged, and we'll check in again next week. But until then, thank you for watching. Take care. God bless. And remember, live by the word.